All right, welcome everyone to the eXp Commercial Industrial Committee. We are really excited to be here today. I've got Pam and Frankie on. Pam, say hello.
Everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're super excited about today and this interview.
Yes. So we have a special guest with us today, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Chad Griffiths. And Chad, I will not exhaust the intro, but I would love for you to give a quick background and synopsis on who you are. You know, Chad is an investor in this space. He is a real estate broker. He's the host of the Industrial Real Estate Podcast. And I would love if you would just give a quick intro into who you are, your background, where you come from, and then we'll just hop in and start talking shop.
Yeah, that sounds great. And thanks so much for having me on. I absolutely love talking about industrial real estate. So happy to answer any questions at all as we go through this. So I actually got my start in real estate in 2004. I was buying and selling some houses with some friends. Didn't really make a whole lot of money on it, but I got the itch for real estate. So I actually started by joining a residential brokerage in 2004. I did that for a year and didn't really see that being the future that I wanted as I extrapolated out my career. So I joined a commercial brokerage in 2005. And at the time, I thought I'd be selling like the sexy asset classes like office towers or shopping malls. It just so happened my office was heavily focused on industrial. So kind of almost accidentally fell into it. But fast forward 18 years now, I've been at the same brokerage. 2014, I started investing in properties. So pretty much I've been adding a property a year, all industrial. And that's kind of the long-term goal, is to just keep adding property and hopefully at one point replace my brokerage income with the revenue from the rental properties.
Beautiful. And that's one thing too I really love about what you're doing is you're putting out good content, and there is such little content is in commercial real estate right now, quality content, and even more specifically industrial, right? And so we thought it would be really awesome to get you on here and chat shop. We've got some people live as well. So everyone that's live on here, at any point you have any questions you want to talk about, throw it in the chat, raise your hand, unmute your mic. We like the live format, and we want to make sure that everyone has time to engage. So, you know, we're really the flow of this conversation. I really want to pick your brain on a couple of different things. Obviously, you interview people all the time. We figured it would be great to bring on the interviewer like himself to talk about industrial real estate. You talk to different people all over the place, all over North America. I want to know from you give us the big picture, what's going on in industrial real estate. Obviously, I'm sure we're all familiar with what's going on, but from your perspective, what do you see happening in the market on a macro level? And then we'll kind of break it down into specifics.
Yeah, a great place to jump into it. So industrial, as people in this room, in this call probably know already, up until about 5 years ago, it wasn't even a commonly known term. It seems like it was always working in the shadows, partly by design, right? City planners like shoving industrial into tucked away areas where the public doesn't see it. It's away from everything. But over the last 20 years, and especially over the last 5 years, as we went through this pandemic, it's now very common to see a big distribution center off the highway. You probably see them next to airports. All of a sudden, industrial has gone from being like in the shadows to now being front and center. Everybody's talking about it. Retail has its own challenges. Office is definitely going through some issues. All of a sudden, big institutional groups, the media, everybody all of a sudden likes industrial. And I've talked to people, like you mentioned, not just even North America. Actually, I talked to a guy last week from Britain. I've interviewed people in China. I've interviewed people in South Asia. So I've really tried to get a global perspective on industrial real estate, with the whole intent that every time I interview someone, I'm trying to say, I want to find someone that I want to ask questions to. And I'm assuming if I find it interesting, then other people tuned in will probably find it interesting as well. And that's been my whole style with it. So what I'm hearing is pretty much what's common across the board. Industrial is still hot, but it's slowed down from the highs of 2021, 22. And we are seeing pressures from interest rates being a major concern right now for investors, particularly because it's really hard to get a deal to pencil when your debt is the same level as cap rates. So something's has to give. Although there was encouraging news yesterday, Prologis bought a $3.1 billion portfolio of properties from Blackstone, and the adjusted cap rate was about 5.45%. So I think that's encouraging. It was an all-cash deal because they wouldn't have been able to make that work with debt. So
No.
I think the interest rates are going to continue being a major story this year. I still don't have a finger on the pulse on where those stop. In the course of interviewing people, I've heard some economists that I've interviewed say that they expect interest rates to go up another 200 basis points. Another economist said that he expects it to start declining in 2024. So it's really difficult to actually put a finger on that moving target. But I think that the market overall is still very active. It's, in my mind, the best asset class in all of commercial real estate. And unless interest rates continue to go up, I think we're going to see a stable 2023 and some light at the end of the tunnel going into 24.
Beautiful. Great summary. And this is something that we actually had chatted about with Charles a few weeks ago, is on here as well. Obviously there's macro economies and micro economies, and those numbers look different in every single market. With you personally, I would love to know what, in the state of where we are in the market, what do you have your eyes on? What opportunities do you see out there still? Obviously, you can make deals happen in every market cycle, but I would love to know from you, what are you eyeballing personally? What does a deal look like for you? Are you even looking at buying anything right now? Are you just stacking cash and waiting? Like, what's your personal strategy right now?
Yeah, the last property that I bought was at the end of 2022. We bought a $6.5 million multi-tenant industrial property.
Nice.
I am sort of pencils down right now, using that terrible cliche that everybody does use. I would be looking personally for somebody that has to sell. So it might be a receivership situation where the owner's just underwater and they have to sell. It's almost a forced sale. But interestingly, the one property that we bought, I JV everything that I have. So I've got my own money in every property. And so when I say we, I've got collectively a few partners. The one that we bought in December of 2022 was actually a situation where there's a large institutional owner, but they had a sunset clause in one of their funds. So they had a 10-year hold on their ownership. So they were the GP, they had a number of LPs, they had a sunset clause, so they had to dispose of that asset, and they recognized that the market conditions were changing. Interest rates weren't as high as they are today. We still actually ended up getting that for a really good deal. So that's where I'm looking at. Is I can't pay market right now. It doesn't make sense. You're almost underwater from a cash flow standpoint from day one. So you really need to get a deal. And if you're an owner that has industrial real estate right now, why would you sell at a discount? If you've got tenants in place, maybe you've got fixed debt on there, there's no incentive to sell other than you'd be taking a loss versus selling it last year, or conceivably selling it a year or two down the road. So I think the only owners that are being realistic about sales prices right now are the ones that are in some position where they have to sell. And those ones, they are realistic. They have no choice. If it's like a stock, if you own a stock and you bought it at $50 and it's gone down to $40 and you have to sell it, well, that's just what buyers are willing to pay. But if you own that stock at $50 and think it's going to recover and you don't want to sell, well, then that never enters the marketplace. So I think that's the approach. I would still be a buyer. I like flex industrial. That's probably my favorite type of subcategory for industrial. It's the majority of what I do myself. But I also like manufacturing. I mean, that's a topic to itself, but I think we're seeing some major onshoring, reshoring back to North America.
Yes.
I see that manufacturing side being appealing too. But flex industrial with an owner that is forced to sell that's my wheelhouse.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like that. And so to hit on that, because that was something I did want to touch on with you, is, onshoring, nearshoring, right? Obviously supply chains being kind of ripped around after COVID and everything. I would love to hear from you. What are you seeing specifically with manufacturing coming back this way? Do you feel like there is going to be a sustained level of growth through this economic change going on? Do you have what's happening on onshoring right now that you're seeing in North America, specifically, Canada, United States, Mexico? We were talking about that a couple of weeks ago. Love to
Yeah,
get
I think it's all part of the China plus one strategy, where a lot of countries have just felt burned by China over this pandemic situation, where there's all these supply chain snarls and difficult getting product to North America. So that China plus one strategy is, China is still a major cog in the economic wheel. That's not going to change, but they need to diversify away from it. So that's why Southeast Asia looks very appealing. India looks very appealing. There's some countries that are very attractive that offer similar types of advantages that China does. But even more so than that, companies are saying, well, what happens if we can just make things here, or make things in Mexico, where you've still got low labor costs, but now you don't have to go across the ocean. You can truck it across the continent. So I think that nearshore and onshoring will ramp up. But I would say right now it's at a stage where it's not necessarily moving the needle a whole lot. Like, the vast majority of things are still made overseas and shipped across the ocean. I do see that changing over 10 to 20 years, though, just as the economy starts. There's something about made in America, or made in Canada, or made in Mexico, that I think we should all be
Right.
proud about. Right?
Absolutely.
It's local. We've lost that, where people had pride in where things were made, but that mentality, I think, is changing. It's just going to take a long time for that to happen. But one thing that I'm really encouraged about, and this is something that I'm personally exploring a lot more, is 3D printing. And not 3D printing in the aspect of something in someone's house where they're just making plastic trinkets, but
Right.
it's actually, they've changed the name of it to additive manufacturing. And there's actually 3D printing you can have with metal alloys now. So you can actually print with plastic, you can print with ceramic, you can print with metal. And I suspect that as this technology develops over the next 10 years, we're going to see even more things made in North America, because you can eliminate that supply chain of something having to be made in China, shipped across the ocean, shipped across the continent by rail, then by truck. If it can actually just be made in a local factory, printed on demand, without having to go through the whole manufacturing process as well. So I'm leaning pretty heavily on that right now, that I think that additive manufacturing will localize manufacturing even more. It could take 10, 20 years though before that hits full scale. So I'm very encouraged by it. I think it's a trend that isn't going to slow down. It's not major yet, because we're still making the vast majority of things outside of North America, but it's coming. It's coming.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I don't want to shift too far the other way here, but also, this committee, right, is for seasoned vets and also, more green brokers as well. I would like to kind of shift back and kind of come full circle and talk about, you as with what you know now, right, as a broker in the space and a major hitter, right? I would love to talk about what would you have done earlier on in your career with what you know now as a broker, right, to kind of bring it all back, because we do have people that are newer, right, and we do want to have more high level conversations about things, but we also want to be able to provide some really tangible action items for newer brokers that are looking to make a name for themselves in this industry. And that's what we're all about. So I would love to kind of shift it back to, with all, we're talking all these great things. Okay. Bring it back to, little Chad, years 1 through 5. What would you recommend a broker do to really make a name for themselves in this space, and some really actionable items that we could kind of chat about? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. And I think about this often. So there's two paths that I think people absolutely have to take if they're getting into this industry as a broker. And that can be in industrial or commercial. It can be fairly broad. Two paths you have to take at the same time. One, you need to become an expert on the market. You need to be the guy or the girl who knows everything that's happening, every deal that's happening, every sales comp, every lease comp, what developments are happening. You need to be the person that knows everything. And you need to be known as that person that has an expert pulse on that market. That just has to happen. That's the value add service that we have as brokers. That's what differentiates us from other professionals, such as a lawyer, an accountant, or an advisor who's always going to be in a company's ear or in an investor's ear. Rightfully so. An investor should have their lawyer and their accountant. They should have that advice. But what differentiates us between every other professional is that we have the ability to know everything that's happening in a market. And a lawyer can't know that. A lawyer shouldn't be spending his time researching deal comps or what lease just happened. That's not their wheelhouse. That is our wheelhouse. So if you can go down that road and know everything about the market, everything, and then the second path you need to be taken simultaneously is that you need to share that knowledge with everybody you can possibly meet. So that's the prospecting route. So that's a broad bucket. I would say that on the prospecting route, social media is important. I think social media is a great asset. But I look at prospecting, and I've said this on a few times on my show, if anyone's caught it. I look at prospecting as a game of football. You want to put the best 11 players on the field as you possibly can, and that's going to be your advantage. Social media is one player. That's it. You can't win a game with one player. So social media is very important. You want to have that out there, but you need to be finding a way to get your phone to ring. You need to be finding a way to share that expertise that you've developed in the other path of how you became an expert, what you know about the market, that value that you can add to potential clients. You need to find a way to communicate that. Social media is great, but and I wish I would have done more of this when I first started. I wish I would have cold called more. I wish I would have door knocked more. I wish I would have went to every possible networking event that I could. I did to some extent. I think that the reason I had some early success is because I did it. I wish I doubled down on that. I wish I really took the effort to just prospect as much as you can. And if you're an expert in it, the beauty of that is it makes it so much easier to prospect, because now all you're doing is you're sharing something that you know about the market. And what investor, what developer, what company doesn't want to hear about information that nobody else knows about? So your introduction is, hey, I just wanted to let you know about a property just across the street from you that's sold, thought it might be of interest. Any chance you want to sit down and I'll share what I know about it. All of a sudden, that's so much of a different conversation that you have than saying, hey, I work in the area, you need a commercial broker at this time.
Right.
It's such a different conversation. So if you do those two things in tandem, if you're committed to becoming an expert and then just singing it from the rooftops so that anybody and everybody that you talk about, you can share something of value with them, I think that's a foolproof way to be successful in this business. I really do.
Totally agree.
I'm going to jump in here real quick because
Yes,
this is so good. And so now all of a sudden we've got questions going on in the chat. Like you've really sparked something in all of these viewers that we got on here. So I want to bring it back to the first thing that you said was you have to become an expert in your market. So do you find that it was more important to niche down and be asset specific, or are you just talking market in general? Like what's your advice for new agents and brokers jumping into commercial real estate? It is a little different than residential real estate where, you know, asset classes function differently. Do you find that it's important to niche down, or what do you mean by that?
I think it's dependent on the size of the market, first of all. So if somebody's in a smaller market, call it like a couple 100,000 people, then it'd be difficult to make a living by just working on industrial. So I think in some of those markets, there probably still is people in smaller markets like that still do just one asset class. But I think in a market like that, you don't have to keep on top of as many properties and as many developers and players in the game. So I think in those smaller markets, you could probably broadly do commercial real estate and maybe you sell office or multifamily or lease retail. But as soon as you start getting into bigger markets, like 500,000 people, then I would say you want to be hyper focused. So I'm in a city of about 1 million people and our industrial inventory is 167 million square feet. It'd be impossible for someone to know 167 million square feet worth of industrial inventory and then also know the 60 million or whatever it is in office and then how much retail there is, and then also try to figure out what's going on in multifamily. It would be virtually impossible for someone to be an expert, as I'd classify them, knowing all those different areas. So there's in a big market like Chicago, which has 2 million square feet worth of industrial, a massive market, it'd be very hard for a broker to even know that whole industrial market. So they'd probably narrow in on one sub area of Chicago, and that's what they would focus on. So I would say the bigger the market, the more niche you want to get.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you. And that makes total sense. Yeah, we're out here in Las Vegas. So like you said, there are submarkets of submarkets, different asset classes. So that's what a lot of our agents are doing is they're niching down within like at least the first year, kind of get their feet wet and get a feel for real estate, you know, like you starting in residential, thinking thinking this was my path and then quickly deciding no.
Yeah,
And
it's
there was
it's
another,
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, even with my background, having a year of residential and I've bought and sold houses, I still hire a residential real estate agent when I'm buying a house or selling a house. I wouldn't even think of
Absolutely.
doing that right now, because that's their expertise. I want to find someone that's an expert in that field, and I wouldn't even think about doing that myself. So it goes both ways. I have that same expectation of other professionals as I would want them to expect of me.
Smart man.
It's
And then
good.
we also had a comment on here. Basically, you were talking about being an information broker, right? Like once you start to learn the market, once you start to understand things, just to shout that from the rooftops and give it all away, whether that's through social media channels, whether that's through YouTube, Instagram, like whatever your flavor is. And so one of the question is specific, love the YouTube channel. How long have you been doing it and how have you grown it? How often do you post on there?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I started that during the pandemic. So it was 2020. If everybody flashes back to March of 2020, I'm sure similar in this room, my phone stopped ringing in, I think it was March 15th, March 16th. They shut down the NBA, then they shut down the NHL. There was nothing. Like my phone didn't even ring for probably a month. And I have a hard time just sitting idle. So that was the seed where I said, okay, well, yeah, I've got to do something until this clears up. So that was the impetus for starting the YouTube channel. And it started with me just wanting to share some knowledge that I've learned along the way. Javen, you mentioned this earlier. There's very little content out there. When I started in 2005, there was virtually nothing. So I thought if I can add to that body of knowledge and share some of the things that I've learned or some of the failures that I've had along the way, it could be helpful for other people. So I've kept my focus the entire time. So I officially got it off the ground. I think it was in the summer of 2020. It just took a little bit of time to get everything sorted out and have a vision and a game plan for how I wanted to approach it. So started in summer 2020. So I guess that's 3 years roughly. And my philosophy the entire time, and this echoes how I look at brokerage, everything that I do is to try and provide value to the audience. And so much so that I never mention what company I work for. I don't even mention what city I live in. If it wasn't for my Canadian accent, I wouldn't even say that I lived in Canada. So I really try to keep everything on the audience side. How can I provide value to somebody that if they're clicking on the video, and there's so many things that they could click on. We all kind of like squirrels with all these tinfoil around where we're trying to keep attention. I
Right.
thought if I can just provide as much value as I can, keep everything focused on the person that's listening, and then give it enough time, I think that there's a chance that I can just slowly grow a community. And that's been my philosophy. Is I try to jump right into every video. I don't give up the long-winded YouTube intro that you see on some videos. I really just try to jump in and provide information and content, and it's worked to some extent. I mean, industrial real estate is a pretty niche area. It's never going to be huge, but there is a very captivated and interested audience of people that want to learn about it. So that's been my whole approach, is just whether I'm interviewing guests or trying to add videos on what I'm doing, I'm just trying to share things that I've learned along the way and still continue to learn. I read more about industrial real estate now than I did when I first started. So it's a never ending journey. And that's why I never run out of content or things to say, is that I'm always learning new things as well.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. Let's see. I saw Frankie put a question in the chat as well. What are the main technology platforms you use to run your business and for lead generation?
Yeah, CoStar is probably the one that I use often, although I have a love-hate with CoStar.
Mhm.
It's probably the best platform out there for finding properties, but that's not saying much because it's horribly inaccurate a lot of the time, and that's ridiculously expensive. So I do use CoStar frequently. For my CRM, I use Zoho. So I've tried all the major ones. I've used VTS, I've used Rethink, Apto. I've used all the major CRMs, and I've stuck with Zoho the longest. I've probably been on there for 5 years now. It's just very simple, very easy to customize. It's not expensive. And I've been able to just set it up in a way that so with CRM, actually, just if I could go off on a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it. We love CRMs. Yes.
So I think a CRM is most useful when it's reduced to its most simple parts.
Yes.
There's a lot of bells and whistles, and that's what was actually pretty distracting for me with some of the more elaborate ones. Whereas I think a CRM, if you start very basic and then add on, there's a lot of value to have for that. So I basically create a page for every single client that I have, whether it's a prospective tenant, a prospective buyer, or a listing. And I have a page for each one of those, and then everything gets tagged back to that page. So I have a consolidated database essentially of, I can look at any one of those pages and I can pull it up very quickly, and I can see every activity that was tagged to it. So on a listing, I can track every single call that I had on it, or every outbound call that I made, or tour that I have. I can track everything back to it. And that's proved to be very invaluable from just a simplicity standpoint. I have it on my phone, I have it on my computer, and I can pull up information on any client and add any note that I want into there. So I keep my CRM actually pretty simple for that reason. So that's probably the main two that I have. And then I've experimented with different ones down the road,
Sure.
but I don't think commercial real estate actually needs to be overly complex. I think it's goes back to those two approaches. You need to be an expert, and you need to find a way for people to know that. And there's almost a risk that in this industry that technology can be a crutch, that there's a silver bullet out there that will automatically make a broker successful. When you go back and like Bob Knackle out of New York is a good example. He handwrites everything. So he has handwritten log notes of every person that he's cold called, or every person he's reached out to. And he's sold $21 billion worth of real estate. Like, the guy obviously knows what he's doing, and he's not trying to incorporate the most recent technology or figure out a better way of doing things. He knows what's doing it. He's a bona fide expert in the market. He knows more about New York investment real estate than anybody in the history of New York, and he cold calls and prospects like a madman. That's I would say put more emphasis on like those fundamentals and those basics, as opposed to thinking that there's a technological edge out there somewhere that someone else hasn't thought of or someone hasn't used. It's kind of if it isn't broke, don't fix it kind of cliche.
Absolutely, and you hit on that too. The simplicity thing. I feel the same way about CRMs. I'm like, it's more distracting. I want to spend as little time on the CRM as possible, and focus on the high income producing activities. And again, everyone on here, if anybody has questions, feel free to throw them out there. This actually, you made me think of something. So I would love to know, how has your approach? Obviously, you're a broker still, right? In this market. I mean, the goal is to, I always say I want to broker deals for the thrills, not to pay bills, right? Like, that's the thing. So, broker deals for the thrills, that's the goal for all of us. But I would like to know, how has your approach, or has anything changed in the last, like, from start to finish, before COVID and after COVID, your approach to real estate? How much in person are you doing? How much virtual? How have you changed your time management as a broker in this market? I feel like some people have changed the way they've done business. I'm just curious to know, are you doing the same thing you were doing? Have you improved it? Have you updated it? What's your day-to-day look like as a broker?
Yeah, and that is one example on how technology has made huge transformation on that communication standpoint, is that we can all join in on a call like this all across North America, and it's seamless. So I take advantage of virtual calls all the time. And that's why I kind of built out a little set behind me, is that I do so many virtual calls that I think it's a great technology. And one thing that I would say and encourage people on as well is that if you frame it right, almost anybody will jump on a virtual call with you. I've interviewed some pretty big names in the industry, and it's just a matter of phrasing how you're what the ask is from them and making it super easy. And most people are willing to jump on a half-hour virtual call if you're providing them something of value, or they at least know what it's about, because it's easy. They can do it in their office, they can do it at their house, they can do it on their phone. So it's very easy for people to jump on calls. So I think that getting meetings with people virtually is actually made it easier. So I do take a lot more virtual calls now. And I've also just shifted how I actually work in the office. So
Mhm.
we have an office where everybody has an office. And I used to be in the office all the time outside of when I had meetings or touring. And now I'm probably 25% at home, 25% at the office, and then 50% touring or meeting with prospects. So I deliberately now try to avoid any rush hour traffic. So that's when I'll be working at home, and then I'll go into the office when it's more quiet. I hate driving. I think it's such an inefficient use of time. So if I can limit the amount that I'm in the car, then it frees me up to do other things, social media, making a tweet, LinkedIn post, anything's more productive than sitting in traffic. So that's probably the one thing that I've really noticed, is that I've just become more cognizant of how I spend that travel time, and just trying to make more use of it. So that and virtual calls has definitely changed considerably over the last 3 years.
Interesting. Interesting. That's a really good point. And, you know, with all the time that you've been spending on these virtual meetings, and again, the opportunity you've had to interview some incredible players in this industry, I'm curious to know what things, with all the people that you've interviewed and talked to, and this is something I've been really dying to ask you, what are some things, I'm putting you on the spot here, but what are some things that have really stood out to you, or things that you have learned lately and specifically through some of the people you've been talking to in this space that have really caught your attention? Just some really interesting facts or ideas or concepts or things that have stood out to you in these interviews that have really got your wheels turning personally. I would love to know if there is anything like that that has hit you recently, some key points, key ideas you've found, you know, in
Yeah,
the near.
there's one particularly profound observation that I've had, and it goes to the fact that we are all busy. So that'd be the first thing that set this up. We're all busy, that everybody's busy, but we also get distracted very quickly. And I've been guilty of this myself, where I'd be talking to someone, or perhaps it was a virtual call, or perhaps it was just a meeting, and I wasn't fully engaged with that conversation. And perhaps what's the guy that stood out the most to me was Walt Rakovich, who used to be the former CEO of Prologis. So here's a guy, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, arguably super busy. Like, I can't even imagine what the schedule of a Fortune 500 guy would be. But what was remarkable about him is that when he gave me an hour of his time to interview him, he was totally dialed in. There was no distractions. He was intensely focused on just providing the best answers that he could and giving me value. And that wasn't artificial. That didn't seem phony to me at all. That seemed that that's just the way that guy lived his life. Is if he was
Mhm.
talking to you for 5 minutes or an hour, he was focused entirely on your conversation. And I think
Mm.
too often we're distracted by life, where we're distracted by social media or that shiny object. I know myself, I can get distracted sometimes. But when I've interviewed some, and Walt was one example, but I've noticed it with other guys as well, is they are entirely focused and dialed in on the conversation, and that resonates pretty powerful. So I think if there's one big takeaway that I've had from interviewing all these powerful people, it's that there's people way busier and way more important and have way more responsibility than I do, and they can take the time to laser focus in on the conversation. There's no excuse on why I shouldn't either. And people notice if they feel like they're the most important person to you at that moment when you're having that conversation, as opposed to being distracted and checking your watch and feeling like you have somewhere else to go. Make that person you're talking to feel like the most important person in the world, and it will change the way you look at conversations. It's changed mine.
That was 10 for 10 right there. Pam, I don't know about you, but I would like to wrap up our portion of that conversation with that right there and open it up.
You know what?
Yeah.
Great. So here's what I'm hearing throughout this whole entire 34 minutes over and over and over, which I absolutely love. It doesn't matter if you're selling commercial real estate, residential real estate, it doesn't matter what the asset class is. Chad, I keep hearing you say you've built a relationship off of education and creating, or built a business off of education and relationships. Like being with somebody and actually giving them your time and 100% of your intention, that's building a relationship with somebody that's much deeper than some artificial, hey, I need to close the deal, I need a commission, actually providing value. You talked about, just give the information away, be of service, provide value, be an information broker. Like by doing things that actually benefit consumers and customers and the general public, you are going to create wealth because of it, not only through monetary wealth, but just health and happiness and a better life. Am I hearing that?
I think that is a perfect summary of my entire philosophy. And what a great way to live life. Like what a great way to live life is that you not only have the potential to make a lot of money, and it's out there. There's a huge amount of potential in the industry, but what a better way to do it. You're an expert in it. So it's something that you can be proud of. It's something that you're always chasing. It's something that's keeping you mentally sharp because you have to stay on top of things. It's not a static industry where you can learn it and then put the textbook away. You're always opening that textbook of life and industry. So I think in 18 years that I've been doing this, there's not a single industry that I would go back and do differently, or choose another industry over this one for all those reasons that you mentioned.
That's beautiful.
I love that. And let me ask you this. So, we've been through COVID, the economy is what it is. You can read all the negative headlines, which they actually just make me giggle. I can hardly stomach the news. There's a piece of me that's like, I have to be responsible to know exactly what's going on out there to the best of my ability so that I can stay ahead of the curve with my industry and my clients. But, how do you also not let that consume you? Like one of the headlines yesterday was hilarious about warehouse and industrial real estate, that subleasing has gone up over 50% year over year. That headline could scare an industrial broker, but what you need to understand is read the fine print. So it still makes up less than 1% of our total market. So how do you stay positive and productive and quiet the noise?
Yeah, and that's a powerful point. I read that same article, and I'm glad that you mentioned it's less than 1%, because you're right, that it was buried in the fine print. So for the most part, I don't listen to or read any local news. I read the Wall Street Journal, and outside of all the industry reports and articles and news related specifically to our business, I don't take in any news, because I think that that's very negative in itself. Hearing about a car accident that killed a family of 5, like that's just not healthy for the mind. So I don't take in any of that stuff. On the business front, that article, that's a data point to me. So that's something that I would share with the client and say, yes, it did go up that much. And that's something we need to be aware of, is that there's more sublease inventory, but let's put that in perspective. It's still less than 1% of the whole market. So it's not necessarily something we need to be panicking about, but it is a data point. And I'm a big believer that you can make money in any industry, whether it's going up or whether it's going down. It's the flat markets that are problematic. And we saw that in COVID, where there was very little activity for at least a month. Hard to make money when nobody's doing anything. But there's always ups and downs. It's the roller coaster of real estate, and you can make money in the peaks and the valleys, provided that you're an expert in the field and you're just giving that expert advice. I try to stay somewhat agnostic or emotionless about it, and just state facts. Like this is what we're dealing with. Vacancy rates are going up. Interest rates are putting downward pressure on prices. You're just that in that role of being an expert. All you're doing is conveying all this information. So I stay positive on the fact that if you are an expert, you're helping people out and you're providing them information that they otherwise wouldn't have. and you're just helping them to make an educated decision. So I take all of that in stride. There will be a time when we go through like some real economic pain. I don't know when that'll hit the industrial sector. Could be 10 years from now, but we will go through a period at some point where there's a bad economic recession. And I don't want to have my head in the cloud on that either. I do want to be realistic and acknowledge that we might be in a really good time now. Perhaps in 10 years, we're in a really bad time. I have really no idea when or how that looks. But I try to just be grounded in reality and use the idea that because I've committed so much time and energy to studying this market and being an expert in it, I'm just going to try and give the best advice that I can.
I had a question for Chad. Chad, you mentioned you use the Wall Street Journal. What other journals or publications do you dial into for your industrial sector?
Yeah, so I use globestreet.com, which is really good. They let you look in specifically by asset class. So I subscribe to their newsletter as well. I get it. I think they send me a digest once a week just on industrial. Biz Now is another one that I really like. Same thing, you can search just by industrial. They put out a lot of good articles. NAOP, I've been a member of NAOP for a long time, and they put out some of the best research papers out there. So those three would probably be the main ones. But then I also just read all the major brokerage reports. So I don't dial in specifically for every market. So I wouldn't go and read the industrial report on Chicago, but CB puts out a ton of great information on big box industrial as an example. So they won't talk about any one market. They'll just talk about trends that they're seeing in big box industrial. So I read all those brokerage reports. Prologis actually puts out a fantastic report as well. Biggest industrial real estate owner in the world. They know a thing or two about industrial real estate, and they put out a ton of research. So that was the one I just read yesterday, was them buying the Blackstone portfolio for $3.1 billion. That was in their press release. So I try to just stay on top of anything related to industrial real estate, whether I agree with it or don't agree with it. I just want to have that perspective. And then one tip that I'd offer as well is set up a Google alert. So I have a few Google alerts set up. One is just industrial real estate. So every Thursday, I think I have that one set up every Thursday at noon. Google will send me a link, a single email with compiling 30, 40 different articles on industrial real estate. And I'll just go through there real quick and see if there's one that stands out and read those as well. So I read a ton. I probably spend half an hour to an hour reading industrial real estate related news every day.
Interesting.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? You said Google. You said you use Google.
Just go to Google Alerts.
Google Alerts.
Google Alerts. You can set up alerts for anything that you want. I've got a ton going. I've got one going for my own name, just to see if I've been mentioned somewhere or mentioned on a podcast or something. So I get one on that. It's free, easy to set up. You can set up the intervals, so you can have it set up. You can get an email every day if you want from Google, and that's a powerful search engine that they've got. And they've put out a free tool where you can get alerted on virtually anything that you want. So that's a really easy one to set up. So you could set up one just like for you could set up Las Vegas industrial real estate, anything related to those news. You get that as the digest every week.
That's awesome. Thank you.
100% doing that.
Oh yeah, I probably have 12 of, like, if I were to actually go through and see all the ones that I get. I'm constantly getting emails from that, and it's just quick. You can just go and scan what you want, and if you don't want to read it one week, you don't read it that week. It's another data point, is how I like to look at it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Especially with time. I mean, again, you're always talking about your time and being efficient instead of sifting through articles trying to find what's relevant. Just boom. I like that.
Google Alerts. Yeah.
I'll write that down. Does anybody else have a question? Charles?
Yeah. Hey, Chad. Charles Marburg here. Pleasure to meet you. And thanks for all that great content. I struggle when I'm doing some of my own programming and trying to find some things, and you're always the go-to. Oh, here, go look at some chat videos and learn a little bit about industrial. And you're absolutely right. This industrial discipline has really come on its own in the last few years. Of course, toilet paper shortages and things of that nature has helped, right? But it was never really, like you said, in the forefront. But I think it's such a great market to be in because we have a really good balance of working with tenants, working in, sales. And when you mentioned, the market sometimes getting tough, and, I've had my own case of seeing some of the subleases starting to creep up, with my heart kind of going, whoa, man, what's happening with the market here? Now, I was one of 30 LOIs on 50,000 square feet only a few months ago, and now I'm seeing a lot of things come up. But you're right, we do have to stay focused on, what is our role, helping out the clients. If I just put someone in and they call me back 6 months later and they want to sublease, half of their space, is that good or bad? Well, it doesn't matter. It's my job to help out the client, and maybe they need to, sublease some space and help out. But as far as prospecting, especially on folks that are getting into the business, back in the day when I started, there was no CoStar. We barely had any CRM or anything. Well, we had ACT, which was a really simple database, right? That we used to plug in things. And we used to go blindly down the street and go canvassing. There's an entrance to the building. We walk in, there's business cars displayed. The president's parking spot is over there with the brand new Mercedes. You can kind of get a pretty good feel when you're in the field there. But now that you have so much on CoStar and different databases that you could know exactly what's really going on, do you kind of get too much into the weeds on having almost too much information and just getting out there and meeting people face to face in the market? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's a great point. And like you, I started with that very basic. I had a fax machine, 2005. I was faxing things. So the world's come a long way in that time. I agree with you completely. I if I were to advise, and I have a junior broker that I hired last year on my team, so I do actually advise him on this. I'm not even speaking theoretically. There's way more power in taking a brochure for a property that you have and just walking up and down the street and handing it out to businesses. And it's such an easy conversation. You just walk in and say, hi, I've got a property for lease or for sale just down the street. Just want to know if you would like any more information on it. And even if you've got the secretary there, she might say, oh yeah, you know what? I know my boss was looking for a space, or she might say, we're not interested. And you just offer to leave the brochure. And if they say they're not interested, then you just move on. Such an easy way to get, it's a warm prospecting call because you're going in there with something of information. So I do agree with you. I think that the fundamentals are very simple. You just need to get in front of people that are making decisions, and sometimes that's a secretary, and secretaries will know. They'll know if their boss is looking for real estate, or they'll know if they'll say, oh well, this probably is something you should talk to my boss. I've opened so many doors, figuratively and literally, by that simple strategy, that I would default to that over these complex technological platforms any day of the week.
Thanks, Chad. I got one more quick question, if I may. And I want to get your opinion on, especially with people coming into this particular discipline, market knowledge versus technical property knowledge. How important is it? Obviously, your marketplace, and in large markets like LA, brokerages have 6 different offices in different submarkets. But, how much information should someone coming in learn about? What type of sprinklers are on the ceiling? Do you measure the truck well in a lease? And included in there, truck turning radiuses, power, 4-wire, 3-wire. I mean, you could really get, again, in the weeds of that information, but what's your opinion on what, a industrial professional should know?
Yeah, in that one path of becoming a market expert, I think they need to know all of that. It'd be very hard to advise a client on a space if you didn't know what an ESFR sprinkler system was, or what makeup air was in a space, or how much power was coming into it, and the difference between amps and volts. It'd be very difficult to properly advise a client if you didn't have that base knowledge. And it's not crazy. Like, for the most part, an industrial building still is just a box, but it's all the components inside that make that box functional. It's not a crazy learning curve to just get up to speed on that. So I would say, as someone's embarking on that journey of becoming an expert, and I still don't even consider myself to be the de facto expert on industrial, even know how much time I've spent on it, because I'm always uncovering new things about this industry as well. So I don't think people can know everything, but there is that baseline on what they want to know. And what I would say to those people embarking on that journey of becoming an expert, go through as many properties as you possibly can, and ideally go through it with someone that knows the industry, and just start asking questions like, why is there this building not sprinklered but this one is? Why does this one have 55-foot column grade whereas the other one was clear span? Like those are questions that very difficult to learn that in a book. You've really just got to physically go out and look through properties. But I to your question, I think you need to know those. I think that's part of being an expert in this industry. And there's brokers out there that could fake it, and they could say, well, hey, my job is just to open the door and show you the space, and you bring in an electrician, you bring in a crane guy, you bring in everything on that. And there's an element where that's responsible thing to do, but having some base knowledge on that, I think, is what differentiates someone that treats this business as a profession as opposed to someone that treats it as a professional door opener.
Amen, Chad. You just totally hit me in the feels. Amen. I mean, right in the feels. Like I preach all the time to our team, you can't set it and forget it. Like you talk about technology and the shiny things. Forget about going into Crexy or CoStar or whatever, setting up a search and then thinking that you're waiting for this property to come to you. Like if I put in a search, I will find the magic property. No, you have to go find the property that's actually going to fit your client's needs. In fact, we have a super quick story on the team where we had to help one of our clients. He's a logistics company, and he ended up getting into this warehouse. And unfortunately, the deal was made without us. However, the dock doors were shorter than his trucks. So what happened, it made for very inefficient unloading. And every time one of his trucks would back up too far or try to get in, if one of his guys didn't stand up and hold up the rolling door so the other guy could back the truck in, which now takes 2 employees instead of 1, every time they damaged that door, which happened twice, because of COVID and supply chain issues, it was $26,000 every time they had to fix a door.
Wow.
He got really pissed about that after a while. And instead, so the last time he had to fix a door, he fixed all the doors on the whole entire warehouse because he said, I'm never doing this again. But something as simple as understanding your client's needs, these are the types of trucks they use, this is the type of clearance I need, and caring enough about them because you've gotten in relationship and you're willing to provide the extra value and walk properties and understand their needs. That's what separates the licensee from the professional, in my opinion.
Well
and I'm
said.
so glad you hit on that, because
Amen.
it like rounds the whole thing out about, you know, understanding your profession and your client's needs, like well enough to be able to put them in a property that's going to service them and their business for a long time to come. And it's not just about a commission. It's really understanding the asset.
Preach it from the rooftops.
I love it.
We only have 8 minutes left, and it's been just such a wealth of information. So if there's any last minute questions, if there is anything anybody out there wants to ask, please do. Just unmute your mic at this point.
We'll play the music.
Everybody, I did just post a link to our newest listing. Went live yesterday. It's a multi-tenant office building, so not industrial, but
There you go.
But just if after the meeting, go ahead and check that out if you guys have anybody interested.
I love it.
I've got one more quick question for Chad, and I've always asked, you know, what's one of the most important pieces of information in commercial real estate, regardless of, you know, asset type? And I always thought to myself, well, what's the hardest thing to get? And that was always the lease comp, because, you know, you can't look it up in things, you know, from municipalities, from title companies. And, you know, there's stuff in CoStar and many other databases, but like you said, Chad, you know, the terms, the concessions can be completely wrong. Is that still a coveted piece of information as it once was?
Absolutely. I think that goes part and parcel, hand in glove, if you will, in being an expert in the market. And the interesting thing that I've noticed is that when you are an expert in the market, other people know about that. And that's other landlords, that's other brokers, that's other people that have that information. So I've found it's very easy to horse trade that information, where I might call up a broker or I might call up a landlord and just say, hey, I'm looking for information on a deal you guys just did in that building, wondering if we can trade some data. I've got 5 comps in that area. I'd be happy to share those with you if you can just tell me that you got on there. You're going to get that 99% of the time. And I'm sure everybody on this call has had this, where you get an appraiser that will call you and will say, hey, I'm looking for information on this property. And at one point I was getting calls from appraisers every day, and I just don't have time to be responding to all of them, especially when it's just one-sided relationship. Like, they're just trying to take information from me, versus if they're call up and say, hey, I've got a couple comps in the area, wondering if you could share this one on the property you just sold. I'm going to take that call every day, because it's providing something of value. There's an exchange happening. So that's always how I've done my approach. Is if I'm calling and asking for a comp, I'm always calling and having something in hand that I can offer them in exchange, and I get it 99% of the time.
Good question.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Go for it.
My name is Shala. I'm out of Dallas, Texas. And my question is, with becoming, a marked professional in the commercial real estate industry, what would you say are the biggest opportunities that we have in order to utilize the technology as the industry is coming, more into a technology friendly space? So we're not necessarily having to rely on just maybe old uses or old knowledge. And how do you keep that fresh in the market? How do you seek that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that's going to become problematic in our industry over time, and where technology can be a solution, is just big data, where
Sure.
there's just so many things to try and keep track of. So I can see some software coming up and making it more accessible and easier to sift through and get the answer that you want. I still am not very heavily dependent on technology. Like, I could lose my internet access tomorrow and I would still do business, because I would just be
Sure.
in cold
You know,
call.
that I think, Chad, a lot of marked professionals understand that mindset where you have the knowledge. And of course, there's a lot of industries where there are going to be generational gaps for knowledge, right? So I think the average age of the commercial real estate agent is going to be about 60 years old, between 50 and 60 years old. Translating that down to the young professionals that are coming into the organization. And it's not just in the commercial real estate industry, it's really in a lot of industries where there's just a gap between how that information is disseminated and really translated down, because there's a lot of experts that have either things just written down or in their head. So my question is just poignantly, how do we as professionals entering into this industry really make it so that that knowledge is accurately disseminated across channels?
Yeah, great question. I think that you hit the nail on the head. This does transcend commercial real estate. I think this is an issue that will affect every industry, is how do you capture that body of knowledge and distill it down to the next generation? I guess I'd turn it and ask you a question. What would you be hoping to get from technology? Like, because I think that that's a mistake that a lot of people make, is that they see something and they say, okay, I see the bells and whistles on this, but what problem is it actually solving? And is it a problem that's worth solving? Software takes time. It's an investment, both time and money. So what would you be looking for on what you need technology to do that doesn't exist already?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some things like that you're doing right now, just as far as setting up the YouTube channel, and when you were answering the question earlier, saying, you really make it, you're not specific to a state, you're not specific to certain things, you make the information as general as possible to reach a broad audience, but still have that education piece in there. I think that's important, because I've checked, there's not a lot of information out on, platforms like YouTube and things like that. Whereas for, residential, you can find a lot of information. But as far as the commercial segment is focused, what I personally would be looking for would be channels like yours, would be that information, would be things like eXp commercial is implementing. However, just having that widely available is something that I'm struggling to find.
I have a quick suggestion for you. When I look to your local chapters, right? Look to your local professionals, because what I heard is like you're looking for that built-in knowledge from the average 50, 60-year-old. Listen, I got in the industry when I was 17, sat in CCIM classes with 55-year-old men on average, earned my degree when I was 23 years old. However, CCIM is still incredibly relevant. I sit on the Southern Nevada board, and we mentor and train a lot of new agents. There are so many young people coming in this industry right now. It's phenomenal. NAIOP has an actual leadership program for young professionals, and we are celebrating them in a big way. And I think there's a 3-week course with NAIOP, and at the end of the course, you're actually you're doing a deal from start to finish, from ground up. And you're competing against one another. And they are so hands-on, boots on the ground. And you will learn your market or sub-market, and you will get mentored by people that have been in the industry for decades. And so that in and of itself, again, where it's the difference between technology and relationship, right? So I'm old-fashioned, and I always love to go back to the relational. Find yourself an incredible mentor, boots on the ground. Get involved in some of these local chapters like CCIM and NAIOP, and they will bestow upon you a wealth of information and knowledge that is just experiential knowledge. It's knowledge that you can't get from reading a book, or, it's hands-on real life experience. And I think it's just fundamental. In fact, we have a couple people on the team that are on the Zoom right now that are heavily involved in CCIM. One of my agents just got a $20,000 scholarship through CCIM to take the courses and the classes, and just so proud of him, but he's putting in the work. So that's my suggestion.
Sure, thank you. I'll definitely go ahead and look into some of those. I am part of a lot of, organizations and networks. My question was just more for the general audience to get that information where you don't have to necessarily be in one physical place. It's just more friendly for something like this, where 20 people can be sitting in and get all the marked information. So thank you for that, Pam.
Yeah, for sure. You're welcome. With that, guys, Jabin, we're 2 minutes over.
We did it. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. Yes, good point, Pam. You have any final closing remarks, Chad, that you'd like to share with anybody before we leave?
Maybe even just touching on the point that you made there again about this being accessible. In a perfect world, I think it'd be fantastic if there was a repository or a database or some area that someone could go to and learn this industry. And maybe in the future, there are more people that start creating content. And I, for one, would welcome that, because I think you hit on a key point, is that it is difficult to do. But I think that is also what separates somebody that has intuition and someone that has drive and a real desire to want to succeed, because they're going to go and find those. And if it was accessible to everybody, then we'd have a whole lot more competition, and it would be a lot more diluted in terms of how many people are in this industry. So the fact that it takes someone to have that initiative, and they have to go out and find this, I think that is what separates us from the majority of people that want to have the easy way to do it. So I'm conflicted on that. It's like, what is the perfect balance on that? And I don't know. All I know is that if for someone that wants to find it, like it was mentioned, it's out there. There is a lot of resources, and for someone that wants to go out and take it, it's a wonderful industry.
Good stuff. Well, Chad, I appreciate you hopping on here. Want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to getting a lot of great clips out of this, and we just really appreciate your expertise and your time. And this was fantastic. I don't know about you guys, but I found this very informative, very, very, very useful information.
Well, thanks.
Absolutely.
So much.
Thank you, Chad.
I enjoyed it too.
David and Pam.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Dan.
everyone. It's been great. Have a great
Thank you, everybody.
Let's
Thanks,
have a good
Chad.
week.
Great meeting.
Still
Let's sell some warehouses.
Let's
Do it. Makes money.
Let's lease some. Hey,
Hey, there you go.
Lease. I'm here for all of it.
Whatever. All right, guys.
Hey, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.